It's an election year. I've been asking all my guests, what are your thoughts on the current presidential election? Is there anyone you're particularly endorsing? Any thoughts that come to mind?
Yeah, there's a part of me that hates to be political. I hate politics on some level, and I hate it when actors talk about politics. But my film, What Is It, is a reaction to the corporate constraints that have happened in the last 30 years or more of filmmaking. And when the Occupy movement came around, I recognized that they were reacting to exactly the same thing that I started reacting to 20 years ago now when I started turning What Is It into a feature film. It's been 20 years. And I was reacting to these corporate constraints that happen in film. What you're watching when you're watching a corporately funded and distributed film is carefully controlled information that is only put forth if a corporation feels like it's going to somehow fit within what their needs are politically. And, there's a lot of talk about money, legalized bribery, essentially, that's going into the pockets of politicians to alter taxes and all kinds of governmental policies that favor corporate interests and disfavor lower and middle classes. And this is something Bernie Sanders has specifically been talking about, and he's talking about it in terms of business. I'm talking about it in terms of art, but I agree completely 100%. So, whether he wins or not, he's getting a very important, message out that, is very close to what I've been talking about for more than 20 years. And, I would very much like to see him win this. It would mean a lot to me. Though, he's done a great service to this information getting out. And there's something I've seen in the last 10 years from when I first started touring with What Is It and talking about propaganda, a difference in the way audiences are responding to what I'm talking about. People are way more aligned to seeing that I'm talking about something that's very important, and that propaganda is doing a disservice to the lower and middle classes, and it's only helping the corporate interests, and it's very detrimental. Corporate interests don't have to do that. Corporations can be good for people, but there is an out of balance quality that's been happening for quite some time, and I started reacting to it many years ago, and I'm very glad to see that this is becoming highly organized and aware, and it's understood this needs to be stopped. Actually, even more important, perhaps, than who becomes elected as president, although I do think he would be very good if that happens for Bernie Sanders to win the election. But even if he doesn't, I'm very glad that I think he could. I think people are recognizing that his opponents are very involved in the corporate propaganda industry, and that Bernie Sanders has been careful, obviously, for decades there's other good things as well, being on the right side of, equal rights for all kinds of people, which is positive. But for me specifically, the element of being aware about corporate interests hurting the lower and middle classes and disenfranchised people at large is extremely important. And people that have been traditionally essentially bamboozled with the propaganda that exists in the media to be voting for people and elements that are against their own good. And the fact that this is starting to be recognized in a gigantic political forum is so positive. There's also an amendment that's being proposed to get money out of politics, because we essentially have a legalized bribery which is not democratic, and we've been taught, which is arguable, that we're living in a democracy. We're not living in a true functioning democracy, but we could. And the way for that to happen is or a step to make that happen is to pass an amendment, which every generation passes, but this generation hasn't. And the most important amendment to pass is getting money out of politics. There's a website called wolf-pac.org. Go up and sign up for that, or at least explore it. This is, like I say, I think it's even more important than who is elected as president. But the fact that Bernie Sanders is talking about this stuff, I also think Elizabeth Warren, who's not running for president right now, also is on the good side of this. I'd love to see it for Bernie Sanders to get the nomination and for her to become the vice presidential nominee, because they both are very on top of the corporate tyranny. I use words that are probably more provocative, but it's an out of balance problem. Corporations have way too much influence on what public policy is, as opposed to the lower and middle classes that are being essentially taken for money and being put in a much worse physical and financial and living situation than they should be. It's not fair for the way the wealth has been redistributed in the last however many decades toward this upper 1%. And it's fine for the upper 1% to have wealth, but it's not fair for there to be so much disparity and to not be paying the fair amount of taxes, and particularly the way corporations are utilizing the people to their own benefit and not letting the people enjoy a fair standard of living. And my films are integrated with this in terms of the kind of information that's put forward in corporately funded and distributed film. By and large, 99.9% of that which comes out is to help corporate interests maintain their control, to help make people feel comfortable with the corporate interests that are taking control, and not having people questioning corporate interests. That's what I was talking about when I say it's important for films to cause people to ask questions for real and to become informed for real and educated for real, so that they know that they can have a proper balance with corporate interests. It's okay for corporations to exist, but the reason they exist is because people make them work. And it's not fair for the corporations to have more control over the policy that's detrimental to the people at large. And this is a great message. I've been talking about this for decades now, and I'm so happy that Bernie Sanders is getting this out in such a large platform. And like I say, whether he wins or not, I think he could. I think it's coming through. People are realizing this guy is actually out for your own best interests. And I would even argue, I'm in the position financially where at least sometimes, some years, I would be in the tax situation where I'd be taxed more. I know that it would be better to be taxed more if the entire culture is in a better situation, because I will benefit from that, as would anybody in any kind of capacity. I can't understand the thought process of somebody that thinks it's better to make the people in a lower or middle class worse off for a very minute differentiation for yourself. I mean, you've got to go out and walk around in the street, or I guess maybe somebody's holed up in some utopia that they want to keep funding. I don't know what the thought process is, but I'm very glad that this is becoming an awareness, and it is an important issue. I hope people will continue to inform themselves about that specifically. And I think particularly young people that are looking on the internet, it's part of why they're becoming more informed. The control of the propaganda is lessening, People can go on and see all of these people, podcasts like we're having right now, and see that there's something outside of what the corporate interest-controlled media is stating, and that's very positive. And I can see the differences even at my own shows, and certainly with what's happening with Bernie Sanders. So I feel very aligned toward what's going on there, and I'm glad that's happening. Ultimately, it's about art, though. I hate politics. I would have never thought about politics for a second, but I could see that it affects the content of when you're acting or working on a film, and that it becomes a kind of a lie, and that's not a good thing. And I would have never ever wanted to think about this stuff at all if I didn't see it affecting that, but it does. It affects it very badly. And of course, the more general elements of what are being talked about in Bernie Sanders' campaign, which are true, is that it affects particularly the lower and middle classes in a very negative way. And of course, that's the majority of the people. So I think that's why it's genuinely plausible that a majority of the people will recognize that this is true, and that if we get that in office, and particularly, like I said, an amendment that will truly reprimand the possibilities of banks and corporations from influencing policy, it's going to be much better to have a true functioning democracy where people vote about issues that they're happy to have their children educated well, to have good, all of these things that Bernie Sanders is talking about are, from what I can tell, right on the money. Like, and this idea that where the money is going to come from, perhaps the United States becoming a more pacifist nation and not spending literally trillions of dollars on wars. There's got to be a better way. Taking a small amount of that money and educating people in a true fashion, and would be a much better use of money than bombs and wars and scaring people into believing that's a good idea. So anyhow, I hate to be one of these actors talking about politics, but this in particular is an issue I've been talking about with my films for many, literally decades now. So I'm so happy that people I can see are really tuning into it, and that's a very positive thing.